If someone asked you what was the biggest lesson you've learned in the last 5 years, what would you say? Welcome to Personal Development Mastery Podcast, episode 400. Today I am going to share with you the biggest lesson I have learned from doing 400 episodes of Personal Development Mastery Podcast. It is like a deep introspection, a personal reflection on this particular lesson. And of course, it is also a celebratory episode, and it is with so much joy and gratitude that I realize that the podcast has 400 episodes. And so I'm going to give myself the necessary pat on the back. It's a huge milestone, a huge achievement. And as I've told you before, my goal is to get to at least 1,000 episodes. So I'm going to keep going. And the reason why I decided to share this with you today on this celebratory milestone episode 400, the reason why I wanted to share the biggest lesson I've learned from these 400 episodes, it's actually very simple and at the same time very compelling. And the answer is that I was drawn to share this message. And I also think that what I'm about to share is not uncommon, that if you are listening right now, you might be able to relate to it personally. My intention in sharing this is twofold. Firstly, because it gives me the opportunity to articulate my thoughts on this crucial matter. And secondly, and most importantly, the intention is that this message will be received by those who need to hear it most and serve as a reminder in their journey. So you might have guessed what the biggest lesson I've learned from 400 episodes is about. You might have guessed it has something to do with consistency. And if you did, well done. It's much more than that, though. It is having consistency when you are not getting the results or the outcomes that you were hoping for or aiming for or intending for. Have you ever had the feeling that something is just not happening fast enough, that it's taking much longer than you thought or hoped it would? So do I. And it's true, it really does. And there is a lot that could be said about perseverance and keeping going even when you feel that the progress is not there or the result is not there. But the particular angle I would like us to look at this from is what keeps you going? What keeps someone going even when they don't get the results they want, or maybe they have rejections or disappointments or setbacks, but they keep going? So what's behind that? The key word that comes to my mind when I think about what keeps one going or what keeps me going with consistency, the key words are trust and self-belief. Keeping the faith is another phrase I could use, but trust and self-belief are the two main ones. And I would like to share with you, apart from my own experience, 3 stories that describe exactly that. The first story is about the Chinese bamboo tree that they have in the Far East. The Chinese bamboo tree takes 5 years to grow. And during that time, they have to water it every day and fertilize the soil. And for the first 4 years, nothing shows. It doesn't even break through the ground until the 5th year. But once it breaks through the ground, it grows 90 feet or 30 meters in 5 weeks. And the question is, does it grow 90 feet in 5 weeks or does it grow in 5 years? I think the answer is obvious. It takes 5 years Because in those 5 years, if the person had stopped watering and fertilizing the soil, the bamboo tree would have died in the ground. And the same thing can happen with our dreams or our projects if we stop nurturing them before we see the results breaking through the ground. This is a very powerful story because many of us are used to this instant gratification way of living and expect results to happen very quickly. But nurturing our dreams or working on something we love or a project or our business may not bring instant results. And chances are it won't happen quickly, at least as quickly as we think or hope it will. And when that happens, some people stop. And there is an analogy I want to share with you. I'm sure you have seen it somewhere, a progress bar. Maybe when a page is loading on the internet. So there is a progress bar that fills up from left to right and shows a number, a percentage of progress. So imagine if we actually had a progress bar or if we could see our progress bar. How much difference would that make to you? Would you stick with your dream and not get discouraged if you knew that despite a lack of results, you were at 90%, for example, and that a few months ago you were at 70%? You would know for sure that you were not only progressing, you are getting very close. That's it, the last 10%. The problem is that we don't have that with the things we do. We have no way of knowing if we are at 90 or 80 or 10%. At least not accurately anyway. And that is the trust that I mentioned earlier, the self-belief. Because, we can only control our effort in something. We cannot control the outcome. The outcome may or may not happen the way we expect it to happen. We are not in control of it. But we can control our effort. And when we put in the effort and we don't see the result, at least not the kind of result we would expect, that's when doubt comes, especially self-doubt. And for me personally, one thing that I've noticed is that when I've gone into self-doubt mode during the, challenges of the journey, one thing that I've noticed is that I get some nudges, some confirmations in my life, or some circumstances or events that happen that remind me that I am on the right path. And I'm talking about simple things like getting a message online from someone who has been inspired and helped by what you're doing, or walking outside and seeing a big white feather in front of you, or it's different for everyone, but I think you can understand what I mean by getting some kind of confirmations or signs that you are on the right path. The second story I'm going to tell you is the story of the water lily. Maybe you have heard it before. So there is a water lily in a pond, and the water lily doubles in size every day until it eventually fills the whole pond in a period of 1 month, 30 days. So think of this with me here. If on the 30th day it has covered the whole pond, then on the 29th day it had covered 50% of the pond. And on the day before that, it had covered half of that, so 25%. So if I continue this calculation, on day 24, the water lily has only covered 1%. So it worked and doubled more and more. The days went on, and it's 24 days into a month, and it is still at 1% of where it wants to be. And then on the following last few days, because of the exponential growth, it reaches 100%. Of course, this exponential growth doesn't necessarily happen in other cases, but this story shows in an exaggerated way, of course, but very nicely, it shows how disproportionate the amount of time and effort that something takes, how disproportionate it can be to those final actions or those final days when it tips over to the other side. And you can actually see the bamboo tree coming out of the ground after 4 years of not showing anything. The author, Walter Elliot, said that perseverance is not one long race. It is many short races, one after another. I will repeat that again because I really want it to sink in. Perseverance is not one long race. It is many short races, one after another. There is one last story I want to tell you today that is very relevant to the topic, and it is a story that Napoleon Hill tells in his book Think and Grow Rich. And he talks about this person back in the days of the gold rush who went out to dig for gold. And after weeks and months of digging and drilling, there was no success and finally decided to quit. And he sold all the machinery to someone else who carried on. But that other person carried on after he had called in a mining engineer and did some calculations. And this second person found the vein of gold just 3 feet from where the other guy was drilling. And the point he makes in the book from the story is that the second man did it because he knew enough to get expert advice before he gave up. So I invite you, if you are on your journey and you're feeling self-doubt, maybe even disappointment that you haven't found that vein of gold, or that your water lily hasn't covered the pond, not even half of it, or after all these years of watering your bamboo tree, there is still nothing to see above the ground, I invite you to think of all these stories and to realize that things taking longer than we want them to take is not something unique to you. It is not something unique to me. I'm going through exactly the same thing, and that's why I felt compelled to talk about this today. You know, there is another analogy that came to mind. I bet you have played Snakes and Ladders, and sometimes I think that life resembles that board game, Snakes and Ladders, in a way where sometimes you seem to be way ahead, and then all of a sudden you land on a snake and you slide all the way down, and vice versa, of course. So what I want to say as I start to wrap up this episode is carry on. That's what I'm going to say. Carry on with trust and self-belief. Be mindful and watch for the little affirmations that may come your way, and seek expert advice or help for whatever it is that you feel is not progressing enough or fast enough. In conclusion, I felt compelled to share with you today this very important lesson I have learned from doing 400 podcast episodes. For me, it was about the immense consistency it took, interviewing guests, writing scripts, recording, editing, releasing on a regular schedule for years, also dealing with rejections, setbacks, etc. So now that you've listened, and if this message resonates with you, and something tells me that it does, think of some action that you can take to reinforce your trust and self-belief. Or remember some confirmation that you had and make sure to connect again with your why. What is your motivation for doing what you're doing? And I will end today's celebratory episode 400 by thanking you. Firstly, for listening, for finding value and actionable wisdom. This podcast grows by word of mouth, and I personally read every single message and review you send me. So if there is something in this particular episode that was important to you, that you connected with or resonated with, let me know. And if there is someone you know who you think would benefit from hearing this, share it with them. So keep going. Keep going. Keep on watering and fertilizing the soil of your bamboo tree, and keep on believing that even though you can't see a progress bar, the progress bar is still there, and it counts and it grows. I'm going to set our next anniversary for episode 500 sometime next year, and I am going to set the intention to do that as a live episode. And you can join in if you want. Keep growing, keep persevering, keep trusting, keep believing in yourself. And stand out. Don't fit in,